I worked as an infrastructure manager in the corporate office of a minor retail chain about 14 years ago. The conditions were kinda sucky, and the IT staff were mostly a good group of funny dudes and dudettes who tried to make the most of it and got along pretty great, honestly. The software development lead was this pale, pudgy, mid to late 30s guy named Philip. Philip had an untreated condition, which caused him to compulsively lie constantly and without any hesitation. Not just little lies either, big, giant ones, completely straight-faced. No matter what the topic was too, he would always add in. Sometimes we would bring up subjects just to see what he would say. It didn't matter if it was one-on-one or in a call with 4 bros, he'd do it all the same, all the time. Since a common drinking thing with friends is asking me to list Philip's lies around the fire, I'll just rattle some out for context. Something about a mouse getting into his cupboards, which he taught to talk by using M&Ms as positive reinforcement. How he got his high school marching band signed to a record contract, my all-time favorite personally. How he could kick 90-yard field goals, but NFL teams passed on him because he had 3 heart attacks. How he was the sole survivor of 2 plane crashes. He once stole a fire truck to put out his neighbor's bonfire because smoke was getting in his house. And when he took it back, he parallel parked it so good they were so impressed that they offered him a job. You get the point. It was really weird. It was also stuff like, sorry, I'm late getting back from lunch. Some guy tried to rob the grocery store, so I jumped across the register and choked him out. They wanted me to stay and talk to the police, but I was worried he would press charges when he finally woke up. I know this probably doesn't have the impact it should, but it's hard to explain how odd it is to have like a 40-year-old dude in a shirt and tie tell you that when he test drives a car, he takes it to his place so he can do backflips in it. He only buys cars that survive the backflip, and that's how he ended up in the Hyundai Sonata you're sitting in. It just sucks the air out of the room, like when someone is yelling on the subway or something. Once, one of the owners called me and said, none of you guys were around, so they sent that Philip guy to help me. Never let that guy get anywhere near our fucking suite again. He's fucked up, dude. No idea what happened, but I heard it had something to do with Babylon 5. Anyway, the other guys would sort of egg him on at times. I didn't really, though. I kind of felt bad, because I would think about if he knew he was doing it when he was doing it, how would that make him feel? Like, you're doing it again, Philip, you know? Perhaps knowing he might not get away with it this time, but that he couldn't help it. Or it was one more thing to keep track of in his never-ending lexicon of lies. What I was pretty firm about, though, was that no one was going to call him out on it. Mostly because I had no idea what he would do, but also because I really didn't want to work in an environment where every day was some bullshit argument. And it wouldn't really be fair to him either. It's not like he could help it. I made sure every new hire knew these rules. I had been there for almost 3 years, and never had any sort of untoward interactions to him or about him. If anything, perhaps I was a bit overly empathetic of what it must feel like. All we truly knew about him was that he lived in a mobile home on his family's property, which had a giant fountain from a Vegas casino in it, because he knew a guy who dismantled one and smuggled it to him. He had married his wife when he was 31 and she was 16, which required parental consent in our state. Big, weird, eventful jump forward. One day, Philip was sitting in the developer suite when out of nowhere he suddenly said this. Hey, Ricky, come check this out. He had a picture of himself with guns and tactical gear. I asked for the Cho special. Tomorrow, me, is dead. He's been trying to steal my power, you know, so you might want to call in sick. Ricky, thankfully, with everything he had in his body, just said, cool, man. Then he got up, promptly went to legal, and immediately reported it. Philip got let out in handcuffs and termed. He obviously wasn't held too long for threats. The police told me to keep my doors locked and my curtains closed until it all blew over. I cleaned the garage out so we could park in it and limit the time exposed outside. It was a tense few months for my then-girlfriend and I. It was well known that I used to have to go into work super early to cover for my engineers on Fridays before anyone else was there. Just me and this big empty parking lot. I remember thinking on every drive over that it was likely my last day on Earth. How I just hoped I didn't hear anything first before it happened. When I closed on my first house, I teared up a little bit. Perhaps I was being sentimental, but I was thinking about how Philip finally wouldn't know where to find me. It kind of fucked Ricky up though, and he quit soon after. I once asked him what made him report it in spite of the normal stream of whatever we were used to. He just said, the motherfucker was talking about power like he was Skeletor or some shit. Ricky's on my Facebook feed constantly with opposing political views to me, but I've never put him on snooze once. I'm very thankful for what he has to say. As a weird follow-up, I met the guy's cousin a few years later. The dude told me that Philip and his wife had a really weird relationship, like she would buy Philip nothing but toys for Christmas. Not action figures or Funko, but like airplanes and dinosaurs and fire trucks. He would just sit on the floor playing with them, making child noises. It wasn't like a weird sexual thing either. I guess just another big red flag flapping in the breeze. I've never shared this story, except strangely enough to my teacher at the time. I was in the first grade at Northside Elementary in DeSoto, Texas. We lived about 3 long blocks down, as my mother liked to call it. I personally feel like it was a lot more. My sister and I were brought to school on a regular basis and walked home together. My parents decided to divorce right around this time. My dad moved out and we started seeing him every other weekend. My mom began dating someone else, and I remember she no longer became interested in talking to us about school and such. Instead, she became very preoccupied with her new relationship. I remember she often had me walking to school as well as coming home. Thinking back, I'm not sure why I was late this day. Might have been a doctor's appointment or something. I just remember that it wasn't very late at all. Maybe just about an hour or so after school started. My mom pulled up to the school in the car and I got out. I remember hoping she would wait there to watch me go up the flights of stairs and inside, but she drove off immediately, much to my dismay. And this is when I saw him. A man, pretty normal looking, stepped out of a car looking directly at me. My mom had just pulled off, and this man was the only person around. He crossed the street quite quickly, at an angle coming directly towards me. I remember turning and running up the steps. There were 3 flights of stairs with landings in between. When you're a little girl though, those stairs seem much bigger. I remember looking over my shoulder as he literally began running up the stairs after me. I had that horrible gut reaction and ran as fast as I could. I remember the double doors in front of me. I was panicked, thinking I would not make it. Even at that young age, I felt the energy coming from this otherwise normal-looking person who looked like a dad. I remember the huge intrinsic feeling of doom and urgency to go through those doors. I did. I immediately turned around and saw him, standing on part of the second set of stairs. He just stood there, staring at me, as I looked at him from inside the building. He gave a frustrated look, then turned and walked away back to his car. I remember telling my teacher about it. Maybe a week later, a police detective showed up to interview me about what happened. This makes me think it may be connected to something that happened in that area at that time. I don't think I've ever been that afraid in my entire life, and it was a powerful internal fear. It was like my body told me to immediately run. I'm from a small town, the kind where you're in the same class with the same kids from preschool through graduation. I was never popular and had my fair share of bullies, but never as bad as one particular kid in my class, Max. He was on the shorter side and had these little round glasses with his hair slicked to the side like he was right out of a movie cast as the stereotypical nerd. He kept to himself and didn't really interact with others much if he could avoid it. Fast forward to 8th grade. We were paired as lab partners and had to sit at the same table together every day for the entire year. I considered myself a fairly nice person and always went out of my way to make sure I was not rude to people, especially people who hadn't really done anything to deserve it. So, of course, I was friendly and happy to be his partner, as long as he did his fair share of the work. The year came and went, and he was shy but very polite. We got along fine being partners. 9th grade started, and I had a lot of troubles at home with my birth father. I chose to move in with my mother a few towns over. I was only about 30 minutes away, but I had to start a completely new school a month into my freshman year, and honestly, it was scary. I may not have been popular at my last school, but I did have several friends at least who I loved and missed dearly. My mom would often drive me to the other town to see my friends and hang out, but I also started making new friends at my new school. It was a good setup, and I continued this way until I was 16 and could drive by myself. I never heard anything from Max in all that time, and honestly, I had kind of forgotten all about him. That was until my junior year of high school. I started casually seeing this other guy, Jack, from my hometown. He asked me to go with him to prom. I was excited and very happy to say yes, as I would get to spend the night with him and my friends from childhood. A couple of months before prom, my mother told me there was this new lady at her job, and she was asking about me because her grandson was seeing me. She wanted a picture so that she could put a face to my name. Well, my mother knew Jack and knew this wasn't his grandmother, so she asked his name, and wouldn't you know it, it was Max. My mother showed her a picture of me that she had on her desk, and the lady went on her way. A few weeks later, she asked the color of my prom dress, so she knew what to get Max so that we matched. My mother was very confused and told her it was pink. About 2 weeks before prom, some of my friends from my hometown told me that Max had been telling some people that we were going to the dance together, and he was so excited. I thought this was very creepy, but I didn't put too much thought into it. Night of the prom, I picked Jack up, and we headed over to the school, only to find Max and his grandmother waiting outside the entrance so she could take pictures of us before we went in. I always had a hard time disappointing people, so I politely took a couple of token pictures with him as my actual date stood off to the side and waited for me to be finished. If Max's grandmother was at all confused that I had brought another date, she never showed it. The rest of the night actually went smoothly though, and Jack and I had a really good time. We didn't see Max anywhere, so we assumed he had just left. Other than his grandmother telling my mom after that he had lost my number and trying to get it for him, which thankfully my mother did not give him, I didn't hear too much from him until we graduated. I went to a state college. I had heard that he had gotten into a well-respected private university. Everything was fine for the first few weeks of college. Then I suddenly ran into him. He caught me on the way to class one day. I was polite and asked him if he was a student here too, which I found out he was. I chatted with him for a minute before hurrying off to my own class. It was a relatively harmless interaction, but it creeped me out quite a lot, since I knew he got into that other school. I wondered why exactly he would choose to go to this inferior state college. For the next few months, I would run into him almost daily. He always wanted to talk and never seemed to interact with anybody else. I found out from some girls in my dorm that he had been hanging around asking about me too, and trying to figure out my class schedule, where I would be and when. He also told them that he was my boyfriend, and he passed up a scholarship to go to another college to come here and be with me instead. They figured out he was lying, thankfully, when they never saw us together for long periods, or him up in the rooms with me, and stopped answering his questions. I left at the end of the semester to move home and take classes at a nearby school. Obviously, I did not tell him I was going. The following year, I got married to my boyfriend from senior year of high school. Dumb, I know. Anyway, we were in his small town, which is the same community as my hometown, for a fair shortly after our wedding. While walking around and enjoying ourselves, I could see Max staring at us from the end of the block. It was the first time I had been genuinely fearful of him, as the look on his face was nothing short of hatred. I tried to ignore him and go about my night, seeing him a few more times, always with that hateful look on his face. Thankfully, though, nothing else happened. The next few years passed by quickly, with me hearing nothing from him at all. I didn't even know if he still lived in the area or not, to be honest. I found out a little while after that he did, when I started working at a clothing store in town. He would stop in and sit in that dad chair next to the door for all the guys to hang out while their people shopped. I mentioned it to my manager because of our history, and the fact that he would stare at me constantly while sitting there, but he always came in with this girl. I later found out that it was his sister, so they didn't think too much of it. He never spoke to me though. He always just stared. When I was well into my mid-20s, I moved to a city in my home state, but still several hours away from my small town. I'm 30 now and doing quite well in life, other than a random Facebook friend request, which I rejected. I haven't heard from him since, and I hope it stays that way. This was back in 2013, when I was living in New York City as a 23-year-old. I was living with my best friend from college, on the west side near Times Square in K-Town. I was going through some tough times back then, as I was unemployed at that time. I had a lot of time though, so I would go on walks by myself to clear my head from time to time. One night, while I was feeling especially depressed, I decided to walk to K-Town to grab myself a drink. I'm Korean, by the way. I walked into this Korean bar and got some weird looks from the waiter as I asked for a table by myself. After ordering a couple of soju bottles, I was feeling pretty drunk, so I decided to walk back home. As I was exiting the bar, however, this Korean guy followed me. He looked very normal, just like your standard, nice Korean guy. He told me he'd seen me drinking at the bar by myself, and that he would love to walk me home to make sure I got there safe. I politely declined. After all, my apartment was pretty close by. He insisted, though, and he looked really harmless, so I decided it couldn't hurt to take him up on his offer. We walked about 10 minutes together, I think, and it was actually quite pleasant. We were both a little bit drunk, but I remember talking about all sorts of things, nothing really too personal. When we finally arrived at my apartment, I thanked him and wished him farewell. Now, my apartment was a 5-story walk up, and there was a main door where we needed a key to open and get into the building, since there was no doorman. I didn't think much of it. I inserted my key to open the door and went in. The door takes a while to close shut though, and it was my mistake for not checking before I went up the stairs. While I was approaching the second floor, I heard someone grab the door from closing. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs rapidly. I suddenly got goosebumps all over my body, and I felt like I was in danger. As I started to pick up my pace, I heard the footsteps begin going faster and faster up the stairs. I lived on the 5th floor, so I started to run up, clutching my keys in my hand. The guy started to run up the stairs as well, and I could hear him getting closer and closer to me. This all happened over just a couple of seconds, but it felt like forever. I finally got to my floor, and as I tried to open the door, I looked back and saw the man's head appear over the staircase. I rushed to open the door and managed to close it right in his face. My heart was beating so fast I didn't know what to do at that point. It was already 3 a.m. and my roommate was fast asleep. Luckily, he didn't knock or anything, so I decided to just go to my room and hope that he would go home. At around 7 a.m. though, my roommate suddenly woke me up. She told me there was a man standing in front of our apartment door. My heart sank, and I explained the whole situation to her. She and I went to the door and screamed we were going to call the police if he didn't go home. I looked through the peephole, and he told me he would only go home if I gave him my number. We then called the police and saw him being escorted out. My roommate had to go to work, so she left the apartment and called me a few minutes later. She told me she saw the guy speaking to the police downstairs. Apparently, he tried to lie to the officers that I was his girlfriend, and we'd gotten into a fight. My roommate went up to them and explained to the officers that I do not have a boyfriend, and that she didn't know him at all either. The police let him off with a warning. About 2 hours later, I heard a buzz from the main door downstairs. Maybe it was the police following up. Surely it could not be him again. I answered the intercom, and I was shook. It was him again. "Just give me your number, please, and I'll go away," he said. I warned him that I was going to call the police again if he didn't leave. A couple of minutes later, I began to hear ferocious knocking on my door. He must have somehow gotten in when someone was entering the building. I was so scared at that point, I immediately called the police. Unfortunately, this time the guy ran away before they got there. The worst part about this experience was me and my roommate being so scared to leave and come back to our apartment. I would have anxiety every time I came home, worried I might see him waiting in front of our apartment door. For about a week, the police escorted us when we felt scared. Bless them. I never saw him again, but it was one of the scariest moments of my life. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed the content of this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you do decide you like my content enough to subscribe, please be sure to hit the bell button right next to the subscribe button and turn notifications to all so you can be notified of every video I post in the future. If you don't feel like doing that though, I post a video nearly every day, so you can just come back every now and then and check up on what you missed. If you guys have any criticisms on what I can do better or any feedback on the stories in the video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as I always enjoy reading all the comments and I try to give them hearts and respond when I can. If you guys would like to reach me for any reason, or you would like to send in a story to be read, you can go ahead and take a look in the description below the video. You'll find a link to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has a theme, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Last but not least, I also run 2 other channels, Mr. Blue Skies and Darkest Hour, where I do true crime videos and dark documentaries respectively. If that kind of content sounds interesting to you, why not go ahead and check it out and see if it is for you. Aside from that though, guys, I think that's pretty much it for now, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.